Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. We've got a really special session for everyone, so we appreciate you joining, and we'll go ahead and get started. We'll start first with a little bit of an introduction. So my name is Carly Sletton, and I'm the head of marketing here at WM Reply, and today we have a special sit-down interview with one of our customers, British Airways. You may have heard in the news recently that British Airways has a new application that could make baggage delays and misconnection frustrations a thing of the past. So over the past year, a trial has been running on select British Airways flights that offers staff and passengers a way to track lost luggage and misconnections while still in flight. This service is the first of its kind globally, and British Airways is excited to be able to offer this to their customers. And for us here at WM, one of the neatest parts of this story is that the app is in fact a Microsoft Teams application built for British Airways in collaboration with WM Reply. So we helped build this solution, and today we're excited to bring you this webinar. We're going to sit down with Chris, who is Proactive Customer Care Strategy and Support Manager at British Airways, to get an inside look into what bringing the app to life meant for the BA team. And we'll also hear from WM Reply Steve Clark on how we built the solution using Microsoft Teams, a tool and license BA was already using internally to make the solution accessible and easy to use for all staff. If you have any questions for anybody on the call today, please make sure that you put those in the Q&A tab. We'll get to those at the end, and our panel of experts will sort those out for you. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and start out with a little internal promo video that British Airways pulled together to promote this application. All right, great little video there. And with that, let's welcome Chris. Chris, how are you doing this morning? Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, lovely. Let's start off with you just giving a little introduction to our audience about yourself and how you were involved in this British Airways initiative and what your background is with BA.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Chris. I am a strategy and proposition manager within British Airways. And about over 2 years ago now, BA sort of invested quite heavily into looking at how we could be more proactive for our customers. And I was brought in specifically to look at a proactive strategy for our customer experience. And as part of that, I was very fortunate to come in right at the start of the build of what is now Connected Teams. So I've been very much involved in shaping what the tool is, how it sort of beds into our customer experience, and how we're sort of rolling that out across our business.
Fabulous. So 2 years. So it sounds like it's been a little bit of a labor of love for the Connected Teams app. So let's start a little bit from the beginning. What was that visionary piece for British Airways when you joined on, and the driving factor really behind this application and solving internal challenges?
Yeah, it was something that we sort of highlighted as a gap in the customer experience space. So we knew that we had a lot of ideas about how we could change the way that we service customers in the normal sort of areas that we would normally look at. But customers being in the sky has always been a gap. The crew and the cabin crew do a fabulous job at helping our customers, but being at 35,000 feet has its limitations. So there was always sort of an area where we knew we needed to sort of try and fill. So what we started to explore and look at is, how do you fill that gap? How do you sort of give cabin crew more support, and sort of get them into a position where they can help more, but also just establish more of a connection with the ground, because we know by getting to some of the issues or being a bit more proactive, in the first instance, can not only speed things up and make some things efficient, but it means you can really sort of enhance the customer experience.
Excellent. So then that leads on to sort of probably what everyone is wondering is, what were those challenges specifically that your operational and your cabin crews, what were they facing? How were they using communications between the teams before, if anything?
Yeah, we've got we had a very limited, or we had very limited options. We had sort of a archaic system, which most airlines probably have, which is driven by the flight crew, and they have a communication messaging service, which can hit the ground, but it's very old. It's a and because of the technology's been there but hasn't been being used very frequently. It was something that we still used at the time, but it wasn't something that we were sort of engaging with the crew much. So, for instance, it's often a message is sent to the flight crew. Those are the pilots and the first officers, and then they pass that message on to the cabin crew to deliver, such as connections information or anything that seriously needs to be updated. Whereas this so the hindrance of that is we had no direct messaging service to the crew, and when the flight's busy or there's a lot going on, that sort of that connection was sometimes a little bit fragmented. So we needed a way to sort of get direct access to those crew managers on board who can sort of coordinate a little bit more effectively, and once we did that and once we could establish that connection, it became a lot easier to sort of bring in more options and sort of have a more detailed conversation, because we weren't hindering the full aircraft by sort of communicating with the pilot directly.
Yeah, that does seem like it'd be a little disjointed if the pilot's responsible for passing on messages, a little bit like a relay. Um,
Yes.
so then your teams on the ground, were they involved outside of just sending those comms to the flight crew? Was there any other action in the old way that you guys were using that platform?
Unfortunately not. We were very limited. So the ground
Okay.
teams that existed at the time were the teams that would send pretty much sort of, if we exclude anything sort of operating the flight perspective, so non-customer facing issues, let's say, or non-customer facing sort of questions and sort of conversations, we were really sort of driven by either anecdotal things that may majorly impact customers on board, or onward connections, which we knew people were often sort of wanting to know about, especially if flights were sort of running slightly behind. And that was it. So the ground team that sent that connections information was pretty much the only ground team in operation. Obviously, this precursed any kind of proactive team being embedded into the business. So
Yeah.
we we were really limited, and the options were sort of quite scarce. And as I said previously, anything that we wanted to do would have either not been possible or it would have been extremely fragmented.
Interesting. So then the natural question is, why Microsoft Teams as the solution to build the app?
Yeah, it was a it was a fairly easy one in the end, or it seems quite obvious. I mean, we'd just come out of the back end of the COVID period, where actually sort of quite a lot of the business transitions to online, and Microsoft was already embedded into the business. We'd already been working with on the Microsoft platform for a long time, and using a tool that's familiar to people and people are sort of used to was a real sort of win for us in regards to that transition because bringing in a brand new app or a brand new platform always has its downfall. So if you can sort of seamlessly integrate it into an app that people are already using, it all of a sudden starts to become a little bit easier. And also, we know about we were sort of already looking ahead and the sort of potential for integration into sort of just the Microsoft ecosystem, which we use across the board, and the more and more apps that we sort of start to expose ourselves to, alongside things like reporting and stuff like that. It really was, in the end, quite an easy decision.
So were there any activities that you did around adoption and training then for the application? And were they a little bit easier then because you were picking something that most people had already seen?
Yeah, I think to go alongside the fact that we were already using Microsoft, we were actually in the fortunate position that most of our cabin crew had some kind of device on board as well,
Okay.
which a lot of airlines don't have the luxury of. So the most difficult bit of the transition was to get people from using the devices in the sort of internal apps that we have to manage the flight to now flicking across to another app to sort of manage different parts of that flight. So the training, it was more awareness than training is what I would say. The app itself is as you'll see later, is quite easy to use. There's not a lot of buttons and things like that. So once you've got people into the space, it's sort of quite intuitive. So actually, just breaking a habit because cabin crew and people who've sort of flown with British Airways before will know that our cabin crew are brilliant and they've got a process which they follow to make sure the flight gets everything it needs to. So the difficult part of that is breaking that seamless transition through a flight and going, oh, we know what you to do an extra step or add a step in there in order to sort of better the customer experience. But it's a domino effect. Once you've been in once and you've used it and you've experienced it and you've got the benefits of it, that then sort of translates into the other crew on board or the next flight that crew operates. And we've seen a gradual sort of uptake in usage since go live.
That's awesome. We love a good adoption story. So Chris, next, can you break down the app itself? So explain how it works, the basic functionality, and how the cabin crews and your operational crews are using the application.
Yeah, so quite simply, we have a Teams. For those who are familiar with Microsoft Teams, a new team is created for every flight that we operate on our mainline network. So both in and out of our hub at Heathrow, long haul and short haul. The cabin crew get added to that app. The cabin crew managers get added to that app, that team set, sorry, automatically. And from around 3 to 4 hours before the flight, they can start to engage. And that engagement looks like it can look in the form of either a check-in, so they can sort of check in for the flight and make sure and sort of tells the ground team, who I'll talk about in a second, that they're engaged, they're on the flight, and they're sort of there are no queries at the moment, right through to sending a message directly through to a support team on the ground. And then throughout the flight, we optimize our in-flight Wi-Fi for the aircrafts, the sort of 90%-ish aircrafts that have Wi-Fi, so that messaging and that conversation can happen throughout the flight, right up until around that 20 minutes before landing when we go back off. But then we have the luxury of when we get on the ground, the device is connected again and we can follow up sort of anything else. So we've got some dark spots, I would say, throughout the journey, but we've really limited those down to sort of being Wi-Fi dependent. And then on the flip side of that, the ground team, which is sort of predominantly a mixture of teams that we here have we have a proactive team who are there sort of looking at those queries and trying to sort of answer things in the moment, versus some sort of support teams who provide information. So whilst the crew can contact the ground for support and advice, and to help customers, we can also proactively push information to the crew, so that they're informed on things like connections and baggage issues that might have come up, and then we can have the conversation with the customer. And like I said, hopefully the idea is that if there is an issue, which we hope there's minimal of, but if there is one, we can get ahead of it and potentially try and fix that before you've even reached the destination that you're sort of going to.
So a little follow-up question there. When the flight lands, what is sort of the window that that team stays open from landing?
We've got a fair few hours after landing. We try and keep it concise. We don't want it to sort of labour over into into future flights. So we normally say a few hours after
Yeah,
the connection will still be available. We don't get too much of that. The great thing is that most stuff is done by that point anyway. But
yeah,
for anything that slips over, we do leave it open for a small amount of time.
that's awesome. And then what has been the user experience feedback so far, both on both sides, really, your operational and your cabin crews? What is the general reception been? Is it making lives easier?
I think so. I think we've sort of we started slow. We went with an MVP to start with, and we've scaled up the functionality. And I think the more and more functionality we're adding, the better the feedback is. Our cabin crew are great at sort of feeding elements back to sort of make the user experience better in order to benefit the customer experience.
Mhm.
You know, getting information to customers to questions that customers always want to know. Um, is where we get our best feedback. So things like as a customer myself and for those who've flown on British Airways before, if you've got a connection, getting information about that connecting flight, especially if you're running behind, is really invaluable for you
Yeah.
to enjoy the flight that you're on. So things like that and being able to answer those questions is where we get a lot of sort of good traction, I would say, from a crew perspective. Um, and then from the ground team's perspective, it's relatively new experience, but I think what we're getting from that is the ability to help, and that ability to help is always well received from any part of our business, because by getting to it early, it often makes things easier for us to deal with, so we can worry a lot less about what we need to do and how we need to do it by rushing around once the customer's landed. So yeah, generally speaking, like I said, we started slow, but as and when we add more functionality, we're getting better and better feedback.
Awesome. Is there something that is built into the app itself that allows your employees to feed that back directly, or is there something internally that you guys use to pull all that information together?
Yeah, we have an internal process for any feedback. We've got a champion group where we try out new features. We've got
Mm.
general cascade. The crew themselves are sort of managed in a way that they've got an option to sort of provide feedback in the moment. So there's plenty of options to feedback. We've had a connected team sort of desk within the crew rest center to sort of for people pre-fly and sort of so they can go over and sort of talk about the app with someone who's a bit more familiar with it. So there's plenty of options there, and we've taken some of that crew feedback and sort of made sort of aesthetical changes and sort of layout changes again to try and help them help the customers. We want it to flow as naturally as possible, and a lot of the sort of driving force behind that is that feedback from the crew. They've been great at sort of leading us in that direction.
So then your champions group, is that a mixture of cabin crew, ground teams? How do you run that?
It's just cabin crew. So basically, the most difficult part about doing something like this is that really until they're at 35,000 feet and using the tool, we're sort of in the dark about how effective it's going to be because of the Wi-Fi signal, because of a variety of different factors. So
Mhm.
really, we wanted a group of people who we could sort of quietly go live with to sort of tell them and prompt them about what changes to look for and how they look. And it's quite difficult again from a because they're mobile users, they're not desktops. So the look and feel of the app as it translates to this sort of on board, the fact that they switch between iPads and iPhones, there's a load of different factors that we want to take into account. But like I said,
Yeah.
the valuable feedback is when they've used it in a live scenario. So that little champion group allows us to sort of tell them up front that something's just gone live before we announce it more widely. And it allows them to sort of circumvent some test scenarios to make sure it works as expected and do some initial feedback.
Fantastic. So we've covered quite extensively, I think, how it's benefiting the teams at British Airways. But from a customer service perspective, what would you say has been sort of the biggest uptick in, managing customer issues, managing customer expectations overall?
I think it's like I said, if we get it right and we do things in the right way, we'd hope the customer doesn't really notice. As much as it would be great for
Yeah,
us to call out the app and sort of and to do things a little bit more explicitly, the chances are, if the crew have spotted an issue, they've sort of proactively reached out and it's all been dealt um, with minimum sort of impact to the customer. So um, really, we'd like to think that there isn't much sort of direct feedback to the app. But hopefully what people are seeing is that small anecdotal things that people sort of have sort of issues with are being fixed proactively rather than reactively, as in the customer's not had to reach out after the flight
yeah,
or they've not been sent away to call us afterwards, because we've been able to intercept those issues. And also what we've found is that, and again, it's an expectation from a customer perspective, as it should be, but things like connections information, things like baggage information, and sort of updates in those spaces, which we know are crucial to people to make them have a sort of restful flight, so they're not sort of worried. Again, it's just sort of being able to proactively provide that is certainly sort of landing with customers a little bit better, and being able to answer questions. I think this is by design not a big bang, and we're not expecting sort of huge sort of emphasis on the app itself, because ultimately it's a
yeah.
communication platform. However, what we are seeing is that questions can be answered, problems can be fixed, and ultimately we're doing things a lot quicker. And all of those things should just lead to that better customer experience.
Fabulous. Well, with that, thank you, Chris. Let's go ahead and take a look at the app itself. So I'm going to turn it over here to my colleague Steve to take us through a demo of Connected Teams in action. Let's take a look at what the app can do. Steve, over to you.
Thanks, Carly. So our solution um, uses a combination of Microsoft Teams as the front end and a custom application hosted in Microsoft Azure to allow us to auto provision flight teams, connect with the ground teams. We receive information from internal APIs at BA and use that information to populate those teams. So we have a manually managed set of ground teams, where, as Chris has alluded to, for support on the ground, and where we have the most automation is the provisioning of the flight teams. So based on that information that we get in, we identify when a flight needs to be created. We identify what crew needs to be on that flight, and the app will go and add the crew into the team. We will then send via an adaptive card a welcome card, which will contain all of the useful flight information that they may need, such as gates, departure time, if that departure time changes, as well as providing them with interactive buttons to check in and to contact and interact with the ground team. All of that is done using our custom broker bot, as we refer to it, which transfers messages between teams. So neither the ground team or the flight team have to be part of the same team to interact. They can be part of their own teams, and the message service will essentially transfer those messages across. And if we can move to the next slide, we have a video of that in action from a flight team point of view. So they are able to check in on the card. They can contact the team for help. They can select from one of several ground teams, enter their message and submit it. And in the background, that message will be transported into the ground team. The flight team will then see a new adaptive card with their query. The ground team will be able to set the status and respond. And then once they respond, the flight team are able to go back and respond again. And that message is then relayed back to the ground team, who will then confirm the status, and that will change and be visible for the flight team. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, Carly. So Chris alluded to we've delivered this solution in phases. So we started off with an MVP, which covered flights to Heathrow, and the main core functionality of transferring messages between teams. We then expanded that to include flights from Gatwick and also inbound flights, as well as introducing the ability to check in for the flight teams, the ability for the ground teams to set those statuses and the flight teams to see the progress, and also some reporting functionality to gain some further insights and analysis around the app. We then, within phases 2 and 3, we did a bit of a UX UI overhaul to make some improvements to the app based on the feedback that we were given. Also are now able to broadcast messages, so a single message can be sent from the ground to multiple flight teams, as well as also integrating with the BA baggage team, where we are able, or soon will be able to send baggage messages to the crew for them to be able to understand if any bags have been reflighted and relay those messages to customers. There's also some future opportunities we've identified working with BA around how we can potentially look at other internal APIs that they have to integrate into that team's interface, and also looking at how AI may be able to enhance this process around some smart answers to some of the queries and help try and make it a little bit more efficient for the crew. If we can move on to the next slide, please. For the next couple of slides, we just cover a little bit more of the app in action. So this is the departure board. So this is almost the central hub of connected teams from a ground perspective. So the ground teams will be able to see all of the flights that have been provisioned. They will be able to filter those flights to identify which ones are active, which ones have been checked in, if there's a particular airport that they need to find a flight from. And they are able to send messages directly to those flight teams from this screen. It also acts as the place where the broadcast messages are sent from. Next slide, please, Carly. So we talked about how the two teams will interact, so the flight team and the ground team. So this is how the flight teams can contact the ground teams from the air. So they will receive those real-time updates, as mentioned, around changes to departure time, gates, etc. They will also, we can configure customizable welcome messages for different aircrafts. So if there is a specific message that needs to be targeted, we can send that through. And then the flight teams themselves are able to check in and then interact with the ground teams using those interactive buttons on the adaptive card. Next slide, please, Carly. And then vice versa from the ground, so how they can support the flight teams, as we saw in the demo. They will receive a adaptive card of their own, where they will be able to respond to the query in question. They can set a status, so they can give some indication as to where the query is up to, and then for reporting purposes, they are also able to categorize those queries, which can then lead to them to some greater analysis over the time to understand if there are particular queries that are becoming common, and BA can then look to put those measures in place to fix them. And then the flight team also see that color indication and status to confirm, so they have visibility of where that is up to. Okay. Next slide. I think that covers us.
Yeah, that's pretty slick, all in all. Thank you, Steve. That brings us to our Q&A. So if you have any questions for the team, we'll bring Chris back on here. Questions about the application, how it's being used at British Airways, whatever you're wondering about, you can pop that in the Q&A tab, and we'll go ahead and take a look at those questions here. Steve, we do have one for you first, just based on what you've just shown us here. Was most of this out of the box functionality, or was there a lot of custom development that needed to go into this?
So it is a custom solution. So we use where we can out of the box functionality, but the actual communication of the between the teams and the integrations with the other BA systems, all of that is done from within the custom app that we've got within Azure. So we've tried to keep the interface as out of the box as possible, and use as much out of the box functionality and out of the box integrations as we can. But there is a fair amount of custom app. The custom app is in under the hood. There's a fair bit of extra content there.
Yeah. And did you guys have any unexpected roadblocks that popped up during the development of the application that were unique to this project?
I might take the time to bring our developer Arta into this one. Who's patiently waiting on the call. So I think in terms of roadblocks, Arta, were there any?
Hello, everybody. So technically, we do not have a lot of blockers. Only one limitation what we faced, it's about Microsoft Teams limitation. We cannot handle the event that someone reply to the message, and this functionality was achieved by using the Teams protected API. We requested access to this API, and we use this API from Graph to handle new messages, copy these messages, and redirect to the different teams.
Lovely. Thank you, Archer. For those of you on the call, Archer is one of our developers here at WM Reply, worked with Steve very closely to develop out the application. Thank you, Archer. All right, so looking at the questions here. So we do have one, it's probably for you, Chris, on what airports are currently using the app so far?
Most of the ones that we operate to. So we've got, like I said, all flights, long haul and short haul out of Heathrow. And then we've got all long haul flights out of Gatwick currently in scope. So that pretty much stretches across all of our mainline network. I think 500 flights a day-ish sort of the tool is exposed to. So we're pretty much covered network wide.
That's fabulous, because we did have a question about how many flights is it being used on, so it sounds like you covered that one for us. One question we have, hopefully Archer, maybe we need you again, but Steve, you can take first shot at this. So was Power Apps used for this, or was this discounted due to run costs?
Yeah,
I'm
so
assuming, yeah.
Yeah, I understand the question. So I think ultimately I think in terms of using Power Apps, it would have meant that we wouldn't have had the most accurate Teams experience. So I think one of the key benefits of using connected Teams in the way that we're using it is that we are using the out of the box Teams, and even though obviously the adaptive cards are within that functionality, I think that there was a lot more sort of extensibility and scalability through using a custom app. I will take the time to bring Arthur in, as I think he was more involved in the decision process at the beginning. I don't know, Arthur, if you just want to maybe explain the reason why we did go with the custom solution.
I have started typing the response to this question. So our apps even was not taken into the consideration as a platform to achieve this functionality due to technical limitations of Power Platform and complexity of integrations with BA internal system. And also regarding of as we integrate with BA system, our solution was passed cybersecurity checks, pen testing, and we think we will. We think that Power Apps is not the best choice to achieve all this functionality.
Thank you, Artur and Steve, for that. I've got one for Chris here, and this is a question around what's next. So I know you did mention that you had the Champions group for, updates and new developments. But what can you share anything with us in terms of what's next for the app for your teams?
Yes, we're just trying to get to a place where we can provide the crew with as much information as possible. So I've mentioned baggage a couple of times. We're trying to expose ourselves to give people reassurance that bags are on board, because we know it's a frequent sort of question that that customers ask. But pretty much anything that will help crew have a conversation with a customer is what's in scope for us. And we're exploring what those sort of major questions are at the moment. And we're getting a lot of good feedback. So, and we also want to make it a little bit more intuitive for the crew as well. So, again, I say it again, better experience for the crew will mean a better experience for the customer. So the crew have been telling us a lot about, what kind of questions come through, and we're sort of coordinating that now and sort of coming up with a plan as to, right, how do we get that into a sort of digestible format, and it'd be even more proactive than we are today. So there's plenty more coming. We're not standing still with the app. We want to continue to sort of evolve it, and that'll be based on customer and crew feedback.
Fabulous. All right. I think that is it for questions. If anybody does have anything else they'd like to ask the team, they can add that now. Otherwise, Steve and Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a really interesting story, and I'm sure all of us will be keen on our next BA flight to see these in motion here. But yes, thank you both. If you have any questions for the team, please do reach out. We're more than welcome to chat with you a little bit more. If you've got questions on the functionality of the application, just give us a shout. Thanks everyone, and have a good rest of your day.